This episode's brought to you by Loot Crate. Would you classify yourself as a geek, gamer, or pop culture nerd? Then this is the subscription box for you. For less than $20 a month, you get 6 to 8 items of gamer and pop culture licensed gear, apparel, collectibles, unique one-of-a-kind items, and more. Make sure to head to lootcrate.com/kfgames and enter code KFGames to save $3 on any new subscription. Not that long ago, and depending on where you live, not so far away, Loot Crate blasted off into a voyage across the galaxy, searching the far reaches of space to find universally awesome gear. Using December's Star Wars The Force Awakens loot as the launchpad, we landed on some equally cosmic items from Halo 5 and more. With an exclusive Funko Pop and exclusive shirt in this month's crate, this is the loot that you're looking for. Remember, you only have until the 19th at 9 p.m. Pacific to subscribe and receive that month's crate, and when that cutoff happens, that's it. It's over. So go to lootcrate.com/kfgames and enter code KFGames to save $3 on your new subscription today. Third topic of the day. We get a lot of questions about this, and I actually personally want to know your guys' thoughts on this. How to professionally review games. Because a lot of people out there, you know, they have their thoughts on how games are reviewed and this or that, and everyone has their own. There's not a right or wrong answer to any of this. It is all just, it's opinion. That's what the point of this is. But you guys professionally reviewed games.
Right.
How did you go about it? What's the difference between how you feel about it versus somewhere like an IGN? How has that changed over the years? How do you review games that are, you know, consistently like online worlds and all that stuff? Like, how has that changed?
It's constantly changing, and that's the problem. Not the problem, but for this question and why people get so offended about it. I feel like, to go back to it, for me, there was a moment in time at IGN where we had been on the 100-point scale, which meant, you know, you're 7.1, you're 7.2, you're 7. We moved to the 20-point scale, which meant 7.0, 7.5, 8, so on. And then we decided to, and I say we, IGN decided to move back to the 100-point scale. And I fought valiantly in my own mind to not have that happen. And my problem was, and this is where I think we get down to the problem with video game reviews, is the fact that the 100-point scale to me meant that this was scientific. That there was a rubric that we all did, and you'd sit down and you'd put in these numbers here, there, and you'd come to this score. You know what I mean? Whereas I always thought the 20-point scale, now known as the Oration scale, was better, because it would be like, this game's a 7.0, this game's a 7.5, and you can then put those into buckets and then argue about why this 7.5 is better than this 7.5 or da-da-da, if that's what you want to do, which is fucking weird, but that's what the internet wants to do, right? But for me, when I first started at IGN and it was a 100-point scale, right, there's a distinct, I hope I don't fuck this up, I don't think I will. There's a distinct sect where, I reviewed Uncharted, Drake's Fortune, gave it a 9. I reviewed Infamous and gave it a 9.1, and then I reviewed Arkham Asylum and I think gave it a 9.2 or a 9.3, but I think for sake of argument, 9.2, right? And the way I came to those scores was I thought these games were amazing, and I think Infamous was a little bit better than Uncharted 1, and Batman was better than both. And so, like, that was how I did it. Now, that didn't cross over to Eric Brudvig when he was reviewing. He wasn't paying any attention to what I did as far as the points, whatever. Damon Hatfield's on the record as only ever giving 0.0s or 0.5s. You know what I mean? Like, that was like this thing that you went through and did, and it was just how you came down to it. Because of course, you talk about, like, night and day differences where IGN is now, or at least when we left IGN, God only knows what they're doing now, versus where it was when I started. Because I always tell the story of when I first started, wrote my first review, finished it, walked over to Roper, and I was like, "Hey, Roper, my review's done." He goes, "All right, publish it." And I was like, "Do you want to read it? Is there a proof? Is there a copy editor?" And he's like, "No, I just put it up. I'm sure you read it." And I was like, "Oh, fucking Jesus." Coming out of a newspaper where everything was like, you know, it was like 4 gatekeepers before anything even got remotely to the front page. It was like crazy. And IGN, not that way anymore, right?
No,
Dan Stapleton now in charge of reviews, at least when we left. He still is. But when we left, that, you know, it went to him. This one happened. So that's the thing, is like, we were at IGN long enough to see it change. And then by the time Colin and I were getting ready to leave, right, I feel like we were so done with scores. And because, like, for me, the way I scored games was I'd finish a game, and in the beginning, I would take notes here and there or whatever, blah, blah, blah. And then I found myself never referencing the notes. And so I stopped doing that. And so I would review games and sit down, and I would sit there and go, all right, what was the best moment? What was the most important thing? What's my takeaway? And then start the review there and go down. You know what I mean? What's the big thing? What's my big idea about this review? And go from there and tell you that thing. And so as that evolved and everything else, and I feel like it was more embraced at the company to talk about what your opinion is, you know what I mean? This, that, and the other. You started getting it where I wasn't telling you how many multiplayer maps were in it or how many characters were supported or da-da-da-da-da. And there'd be comments asking for that. And it was always like, I get that, but there's 12 other reviews out there right now at Embargo that are telling you that. You know what I mean? Like, I'm going to go in this direction and do that. And sometimes it was well received and sometimes it was Dead Space 2. And that's how it was. You know what I mean? And it's this interesting point of, I guess, convergence right now, I feel like, where as we were breaking away and then broke away, right? Like, I think everyone was starting to wrap their head around what a personality was and how this works and what is a critic and how this, da-da-da. And so now people watch our reviews, right? And like, well, when we put something up, like my Metal Gear review was just me ranting at the camera for 30 minutes, no score or anything. And they're okay with that because they finally understand that they can go elsewhere and do it. And for me, it's just, again, the industry and us as fans aging, right? And the fact that now when I got to IGN, right, my examples for reviews were EGM and their multiple opinions, IGN, GameSpot, GamePro, and Fun Factor. And like, you know what I mean? It was numbers, whereas now so much of it's video that it is opinions. So I think we're in a better spot. It's evolved to that point, and I think people get it in a way that, like, cool, Greg and Colin won't agree about every game, but I know that I'm more in Colin's camp because he likes games X, Y, and Z, but I know I agreed with Greg about action-adventure games. So if that, you know what I mean? Like, you can take that kind of information away from it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. That was ranting, sorry.
No, it was great. Colin?
I think one of the things that Greg didn't touch on, because I think we have a lot of the same opinions on this. I mean, first of all, review scores are fucking stupid. I just want to reiterate that. Numbering reviews is fucking stupid. And I don't understand why anyone does it, and I don't understand why anyone would like it or why they would want it. The problem with it is that reviews need to be read through the lens of subjectivity. And when there's no cross-referencing of scales between outlets, the numbers become meaningless. Then Metacritic becomes meaningless. When Giant Bomb gives something 3 stars, that isn't a 6. You know what I mean? Like, and it's not, that's not a 6 on IGN. And so when you like fuse all these numbers together, you're like, well, blah 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 gave this game a 7 and blah 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 gave this game an 8. And I'm like, they might actually feel the guy that gave the game an 8 might even fucking like the game less than the guy that gave it a 7. You know, like Eurogamer, for instance, is like notorious for really low scores, but their scoring rubric seems to be way more reasonable. When they give a game a 6, it doesn't mean they hate it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
That's something we always worried about at IGN, right? Or people would be that we weren't exploring the scale. You know what I mean? That everything was 7.5 or above, and then eventually 8s or whatever. And like, I remember when Dan came in, he's like, "I want 9s to be harder to obtain. Let's talk about what that means and stuff like that." But yeah, if you gave IGN a game a 5, that didn't mean it's average. It's run of the mill. It, like, the word was meh, and like for me, that was always the thing. I didn't like the scores, so I would sit there and go, what did I think of this game? Did I think it was outstanding, amazing, good, what I meant, all these different things. But like, yeah, saying a game's meh and it's a 5 means, oh my God, it's so close to being bad. You know what I mean? It's like, well, it's also close to being good. Like, we're boiling it down to where it's like, that's too easy. That scale's too small.
Yeah, I think that it's just the only thing you can take away from reviews is what's said in the review itself. The wording is so important, and the way there's no objective way to review a game, because I always say gameplay is king, and I mean it. I fucking mean it. You know what I mean? Unless there's something radically different about a specific game, like Journey or something like that. The way the game feels to play, that's why we play games. And that's always most important to me. Greg might not agree. In fact, like, Greg might look at The Last of Us, which I gave a 10 to because of how it played and its narrative, and Greg might give it a 10 because of his narrative and then its gameplay. And those are 2 different reviews, even though they came to the same arbitrary number. So what I'm saying is that I think that some of the impetus has to be put on the outlets, but some of the impetus also has to be put on the desires of the consumer and the reader. And what they want. And we assume that they want scores. But I don't believe that if we trained their minds to think differently in a less reductive way, that they wouldn't want to just sit there and have something a little more thoughtful put into these reviews. Because ultimately, it does not matter what you say as long as the numbers on the bottom, you can see those metrics pretty easily.
Yeah.
So like, but that's because that's just what we do. There is no other way to do it.
Well,
you know
I think it's just people. I don't agree that, like, if we changed it, that it would change. Like, I think that, like, what we do is changing that, and people are coming to us. But take it out of just video games. People like rating anything 1 to 10, or 1 to 5 or 1 to 100, whatever it is, like grades even, you know, like you need that. Like it's the same shit with school where it's like our school's just not going to grade you. Like that's.
Well, no, I mean, because I think that that's different in the sense that it doesn't matter what the other school's doing. You know what I mean? Like if you get a 90 is an A- at your school, then that matters in your district. And then maybe when you go to college, it might be a little different. But when you're saying like, okay, what's the Metacritic score of a game and the different weights of outlets or whatever, and then you realize like, you know, when 1UP used to give scores and they would give letter scores, whatever, then they had to be translated into numbers, but they were not equivalent or symmetrical with the intent behind the number or behind the letter all the time. There's just a major problem, I think, with scoring. Like the proof should be in the pudding. So read the fucking review. You know what I mean? That's like what I always say is like, you can't possibly know how a person feels just by boiling it down to a number. And I fought for a long time to get rid of scores when we were at IGN. It was a fight that I fought by myself, but it was something that I was like, you know, why don't we buck the trend and try something a little different here where we can focus on the content of the review just like we would focus on the content of the game. And you'll find much more enlightening things about a game when you just read what a person thinks about it. And there's no score at the end. I would have loved to have been able to review The Last of Us and not put a score on it at all. You know, 10 made the most sense to me for the score, but I would have loved to just wrote 1,500 words about why this game is so fucking fantastic and maybe some of its little problems, and then let people make their own decisions because they might see, well, Colin really likes the narrative and that's what I'm really playing for, so I'm going to play The Last of Us. And some people might be like, wow, the multiplayer is really surprising and I didn't realize that, and how is that reflected in the score? I have no fucking idea, but I don't even care about the content of the campaign. I want to play the multiplayer. It sounds really good. I just think that a lot of nuance has been lost. So I think that reviews are in a better place than they've been, just in the sense that it's like an upside down pyramid. Reviews used to be like in gaming press in the 80s, very marketing heavy. Nintendo Power is a great example of that. None of us even knew for years. I mean, it was common knowledge, but as kids, we didn't know Nintendo owned Nintendo Power. I mean,
we didn't see the problems with it.
Right. We didn't see the problems with it. And frankly, I'm not so sure that there were major problems with it, right? Like I remember them shitting on games all the time. It wasn't like but there was definitely a conflict of interest, but we didn't know. Mm-hmm. And then it kind of like got out, and then you got like the unofficial magazines, right? So you got like, well, you had EGM and GamePro and stuff, but PSM was really the first example of a magazine that I was really into, which came out in '97 when I was like, it was I think September or August 1997, their first issue, around when Final Fantasy VII was coming out, and I remember being like, this is an unofficial, totally unabashed.
They can say whatever they want.
Yeah, and that's where we go. And then you got the internet age and all that kind of stuff kind of concurrent to that. And then we've gotten to a place where like there are shitty fucking reviews out there for like every game, just like awful reviews. But there are really great reviews too. I think Jim Sterling's a great reviewer. I think that there are good reviewers at the big outlets. I think to the point of having a fair, reasonable scoring rubric, I think GameSpot is one of the great outlets that does that. When a game gets a 9 everywhere else, they give it a 7, but it's not really reflected. It just as an example, they don't always do that, but it's not really reflected in the score. That means something to them to give a game a 9. Maybe that's thrown around a little bit more somewhere else. But this is the problem with reviews and why like the words matter, not the numbers, because the words mean something. Words have fucking definitions. If a game is, runs at 30 frames a second and has a story that lasts 15 hours, well, that's a fact. If a game gets a 9, well, that doesn't mean anything to me. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of where I stand on reviewing. But I do think that it's both sides that there are problems with both sides. There's a problem on the because I agree with you in a sense that people like to score things and stuff, but I don't agree that if people had a different solution, which they don't, that they wouldn't like it better. You just have to give it to them, and it's not really been tried.
Yeah, I mean, I just think it's one of those things where it's like, not to say that something else isn't better, because I mean, I agree with you. Like that's why we do things the way we do. It's like I believe in talking and hearing things. I believe in writing and reading things. You know what I mean? What?
I just love that quote. I believe in talking and hearing things.
No, but that makes
I know it makes sense, but out of context, it's brilliant.
Yeah, okay. Well, in context, it makes sense. I'm not that stupid.
It's not that you no one's
But the number scale, I think that it's not so much a better than, it's just that people like that. And it makes sense like across the board, even if you're totally right. 9s are not equal. But to everybody, 1 to 10 means something, So my question going off that to you guys is, did you, when you were reviewing games, how would you let other, like all the shit that we just talked about affect your score? Like, would you think about what GameSpot's giving it?
No.
Would you think
you
about
can't do that.
what anyone else at IGN would do?
And that was the whole thing is like, You know, there's a Facebook group for, at least in our day, I think it's still going.
No, it still exists. I still
I'm sure.
It's top secret.
Facebook. Yeah, where you can, like, all these reviewers are together, right? And usually it's used for, hey, I'm stuck here. I don't mean to be an idiot. And somebody like, oh, I did this. Or, hey, can we get a multiplayer match? Da da da. But like, if I was reviewing a game, I would avoid that like the plague. I didn't want to know what anybody else thought. Well, I always loved the idea of coming out and seeing what everybody thought at once.
To be clear, that group only really exists for that.
Yeah.
Like the.
But I mean, I don't even want somebody to say mission 3 is frustrating me right now. How do I don't want to know that. You know what I mean? If that makes sense.
Right.
No. I'm not saying it's collusion in there where they're like, I'm going to go with a 9. What do you guys think?
No, that doesn't happen in there. But I've found that group very useful in the past. For a couple of reasons that have helped people more often than not actually in there as well with like I think the last game I even helped anyone in was like Metrico, so that was a while ago.
Yeah.
It was useful. It's like a way for reviewers to talk to each other without, so they can because no one else there's no review there's no walkthroughs, no one knows what the fuck's going on. So I would approach a review, you have to be thorough, you have to be fair. I was always so shocked about the propensity of some people to not finish a game or not necessarily finish a game because I've reviewed games that I didn't finish if I played for like 40 hours or something like that. I'm like, all right, I'm good. But like where people just barely touch a game and then their trophies or their achievements are like, people have gotten called out for that in the past, and that always shocked me. That like you have to give a game due diligence, you have to be very fair, you have to be very thorough. You also have to be very fair to yourself though. Amy is a good example. Amy is the lowest score I ever gave a game. I gave it a 2. And it's one of the worst games, if not the worst game I've ever played in my life. And my review is about how like I refuse to play anymore of it. Like the review is like I'm done. Like I'm not playing this game anymore. It's fucking awful. Like I played it for however many hours. I can't get past this one part because it's not fair. Game's fucking trash. And I said that, by the way, in a very honest and forthright way to educate the consumer. And I had an opportunity set up already to interview the developers about the game, and they canceled on me because the review was so fucking harsh. And I did that even though I knew that I was probably going to piss people off, but I didn't care because my loyalty and my job is to inform the reader. I don't really care how the publisher or the developer feels about anything I say, to be perfectly honest with you. I still don't, if you haven't noticed. So I always approach the review in a way that's like, how can you boil this down into its essence to inform people about the things that are most important about it in the most honest way possible through like your lens? That was always what was important to me too. Everyone's like, there's no objectivity in anything. Someone can legitimately look at The Last of Us and be like, I don't think this is a good looking game. And I think they would be crazy, but it doesn't mean that what they have to say is invalid. So you have to embrace the subjectivity of a review and go all the way in on that. I think.
And that's why it was so frustrating when they didn't want us to speak in first person anymore at one point at IGN. Like, because, different editors, different review people come in and they change everything around. And like, that was hard for me because then it started to be, it's for me when we talk about right now and like where we're at right now and the fact that how Colin feels about this and Greg and this or Jim Sterling, to go read the reviews and listen to that. I think back to when I used to read IGN reviews before I worked at IGN, and it was IGN gave this game whatever it was.
And I think that is to this day, that's what it is to majority of people.
And that's so terrifying. You know what I mean? Because how many times do we fight when we were at IGN? How many times do we fight now about what we think of a game? You know what I mean? Of like, I can't believe you think that. And I read Mitch's tweets about games and I'm like, are you kidding me? That game is not nearly, you know what I mean? But for somebody to think like that's Bible truth, that's when I loved the fact of infusing who you are, what it is, how it goes. You know what I mean? Like my example of that always is Naughty Bear, right? Where my opening paragraph's like, I've only played this game for 4 hours, but I don't need to play anymore to tell you it's awful. You know what I mean? Like I'm falling through the world, this happened, da da da. But again, it's to the point of that was my thesis for that review, right? Everything you're writing is a persuasive essay, and I'm telling you my opinion. And sure, you can probably go to this other site, and I'm sure somebody's platinumed it, gone through, done all this stuff. That's not me. I'm telling you what happened with me and why I stopped playing.
Naughty.
No, naughty. And then those badass motherfuckers earned all my respect when they put out a Game of the Year edition for one of the worst games of the year.
What a great idea for a
Fuck
game.
yeah,
Though.
go get them.
Cool.
That was one of my greatest. I actually really like that game with all of its shortcomings, but my favorite thing was busting Greg's balls about it for years. That I like really loved it. It became like a running joke. So I just think that we have to figure out a way to review things better, and we have to continue to evolve. Not we necessarily at this company, but just everyone in general. And then I think also the consumer has to accept that they might have to look at reviews a different way too. Because if we can just be a little more open-minded about what a review is capable of and take them a little more seriously, then lo and behold, you're going to get way more out of them. The more reductive you want to look at a review, the more reductive what you're going to get out of the review is going to be. That's just math. I mean, you know what I mean? Like if you take the time to read 2,000 words about a game you really care about, you are going to get way more out of that review than if you just look at the score and you're not even really sure what the score means.
But what if I look at the score and it's starkly different than somebody else's score, so then I just go and attack that person?
Yeah, I mean
that sounds great, right?
That's the other thing, and I always feel bad about that is we've all been the outlier, like
Yeah.
all of us in the past. I think one of the games that I was the biggest outlier on was that Castlevania 3DS game, which was fucking trash. And some people like gave it like an 8 and a 9, and I gave it like a 4. This game's awful. This game's like a wannabe Symphony of the Night with no soul, no interesting graphics, no interesting characters, nonsense. Got fucking destroyed for that review by Nintendo fans. But I stood by it. I still stand by it.
Mine, I had to look up mine. The one that I think of all the time, right, is I Am Alive. Because I Am Alive,
yeah, with the
I
gun?
played in
Where you could just the guy will never attack you if you have the gun out. Wasn't that the weird?
It was the post-apocalyptic black and white
I know.
one.
But didn't we
yeah.
do a video where it was like you could like pull the gun out, the guy will run at you. And then you pull
Oh,
the gun
right.
out, he
Yeah,
runs
yeah,
away.
yeah.
You could get into like this AI cycle. It was really funny.
And I remember being like, this game is bad. It was GDC, I think, right? It was definitely, I was going to a show or something, and I was on the Muni, and I was on there, and I saw it go live on my phone. I think I gave it a 4 or 5 if I just looked right on the Metacritic page there. It pops up on Google. Yeah, 4 or 5 out of 10. Went into the tunnel, no service or whatever, came out, went right to work at GDC, and like hours later checked my Twitter and it's just like, like, are you fucking and I'm like, what is going on? Like, no one's even played this game. And then I looked around, like GameSpot gave it an 8 and all this stuff, and I was like, oh. And then it's just one of those things of like, how awesome is it that people can take the same thing and have such different reactions and be so different to it. But like, of course, nobody wants that at the time. This is a game we've been excited for, and this is it. And I want to be justified in loving this game.
Yeah.
So even though I don't know anything about it, fuck you.
Yeah. Dan Shu gave Luigi's Mansion a 4. I think it was a 4. And it broke my heart. Because the other 2 reviews were higher, and I was like, you're wrong. I hadn't played it yet, but I was like, you can't be right about this.
Yeah. You want me to text him right now? Tell him?
You should be like, dude, why'd you do that to me? Be like, who the fuck's
It could have been the year of Luigi then.
I like this topic a lot. I think there's more ways we can look at it, like comparing the different scales and the pros and cons of each one, if we were to go with numbers. Let us know in the comments what you'd want to hear from like a part 2 of this or an addendum at some point in the future when we can review that. And this topic brought to you by DraftKings. Football season marches on, and while your season-long fantasy team might be going nowhere fast, every week is a new shot for glory at DraftKings.com. DraftKings is the destination for one-week fantasy football, where you can relive the fantasy draft and play for huge prizes each and every week. Challenge your friends in a custom league or join an existing one to play for your share of the $1 billion in prizes up for grabs this year. Just pick your contest, draft your players, and collect your winnings. That's it. Renew old rivalries or create new ones by going head-to-head with friends, colleagues, and fantasy players from all around the country. DraftKings is crowning a new millionaire every week this season. You could be next, but only if you play.
Oh.
This isn't fantasy as usual. This is DraftKings. Welcome to the big time. That is my favorite line.
Welcome to the
every
big
single
time.
Hurry to DraftKings.com now. Use promo code KINDOFFUNNY to play for free with your first deposit in Sunday's $1 million fantasy football contest. First place takes home $100,000 and a lifetime of bragging rights. Enter BANG for free entry now. Only at DraftKings.com.
Bang!
That's
He's taking it to the
DraftKings.
house. Mike Kelly, shout out.